In the beginning, there was nothing. And then...
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Player One Start. Today we're going to talk about the PlayStation Classic. Some of you may realize that I'm a little bit late to the party on this console. Well, it's because I just got this console not too long ago. As with many people, seeing the game lineup and some of the early reviews of this console, I decided to stay away from it, and I vowed only to purchase it if the price became below a certain point. So that's right, just recently, thanks to a member on the Twitter community, they pointed out that the PlayStation 1 Classic had dropped in price to a point that was acceptable to me. I ended up picking up mine for $30, plus tax.
And here it is. This is the PlayStation Classic. This is not my first time getting my hands on the box, as I've constantly seen these in store displays, mainly in the clearance section of the store. I do find it curious that the system itself has a rating of M for mature. I'm assuming they have to give the system a rating of the game that has the worst rating. One disappointment printed right on the front of the box is that it does not come with a USB to AC power adapter. Overall, I do think the box is designed very well, and there are several images printed all over this box that instantly raises that feeling of nostalgia someone who played the system in the past would be looking for. I do like that they printed every single game on the back of the box along with a screenshot so you can tell what the game's going to look like. As I haven't heard of most of these games or played them before, this is actually quite helpful. Tearing into the box, it actually took me a bit longer than it should have to get this open. I was trying to save the box from damage, but was not really too successful. Once you do get the outer box open, it's time to remove the inner box. This is actually how Sony and a lot of other people have been packing their boxes lately. They have an outside box, which is decorated more for an in-store shelf display, and they have an inside box, which is not as flashy, but provides better protection when the box is being handled. Alright, the first thing you see when you get the box out is the PlayStation Classic sitting right on top. Pull it out here, it's very lightweight and definitely very well designed. I like the buttons that it has on the top. Turning it to the front, you can see the oversized USB ports. And on the back, you can see the HDMI and power adapter input. Underneath the box, once you lift open the flap, you will see everything else that you need, including one of the two controllers. I have to say, these things feel very nice in my hand, and I think they're the same exact size, if not they're very close to the original PlayStation. Of course, my first PlayStation had the dual analog sticks. And what console wouldn't be complete without a couple of manuals? So overall, this is everything that comes with the PlayStation Classic, unless mine was missing something, but I don't think it was. I don't have any extra USB to AC power adapter boxes, so I ended up ordering this one off of Amazon. And it looks like it's going to do the trick just nicely.
So after unboxing this console, I can see where some of the value comes in. First off, it comes with two controllers. Granted, they're not the DualShock sticks, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. But that means that you don't have to buy this accessory to make it two players. It comes with an HDMI cable, which I think most consoles do these days. And it comes with the power cord, so you have to provide your own adapter for a wall plug-in. Even before this console was released, I saw a plethora of people posting online already saying they canceled their pre-orders. They started saying how bad the console is, how they didn't include this, didn't include that, how bad the graphics look. And these weren't just the people who got advanced units. So I'm not quite sure if all of the negative hype was just people repeating what other people were saying. So let's take a look at some of the things that I've heard online, and I'm going to see if these are true at the end of this video.
So as I go through playing these games, I'm actually going to be looking at my checklist of cons that I see most oftenly cited in PlayStation Classic reviews. The first one being just general poor quality emulation. The second thing is that it's a PAL title. Now this was a huge criticism when this thing first came out. I'm also looking for screen tearing. This was something that only a few reviews mentioned, but it was still there. Just general bad upscaling, and what this means is that sometimes parts of the image will look crooked, skewed, or otherwise malformed. And lastly, polygon breaks. And this could be as part of the upscaling the polygons don't necessarily meet, and in fact this was something that was apparent on the original PlayStation as well. But since you don't have any sort of filter or smoothing going on, they say it's pretty bad in this one. So this is just a short list of some of the things I'm going to be looking at as I play through each game on the PlayStation Classic.
Alright, so those are the things I'm looking for. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start playing through each of these games one at a time. And the only thing I'm going to do is review the games themselves. When I'm done playing all 20, I'm actually going to go back and take a look at all these items on this list. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started and dive into some of the games.
Well, the boot up screen definitely encourages some nostalgia. There's a guide that tells you what the buttons do, and then you are into the console. It is nice that you can see all of the games built into the console without having to scroll to them, but I'm just going to go ahead and get started with the first game, which is Battle Arena Toshinden. It is nice that each game starts up with that classic PlayStation logo and theme. And here we're going to have an early look at a European ROM, as this does say it was published by Sony Computer Entertainment of Europe. Battle Arena Toshinden is a weapons-based fighting game developed by Tamsoft and published by Sony Computer Entertainment in 1995 for the Sony PlayStation. When looking at the gameplay, it does play, in my experience, almost exactly like Virtua Fighter. If anything, they definitely got the look and feel down from that game, so if you're a fan of those games, I guess you're going to like this one. Alright, moving on to Cool Borders 2. And this is another European ROM. But if you're new to this series, Cool Borders 2 is a snowboarding video game developed by Wep Systems for the PlayStation. The main goal of this game is to complete courses in the shortest time, while earning points by performing tricks to get the best high score. The game offers 7 snowboarders, 18 snowboards, and 10 courses to compete on. It was a better choice of Sony to select Cool Borders 2 rather than the first game. However, if they would included the dual analog sticks, they would have actually hit a better game in my opinion. Overall, this game is just okay. Alright, next up we're going to take a look at Destruction Derby. This game is a vehicular combat racing video game developed by Reflections Interactive and published by Psygnosis. This game is based on the sport of the Demolition Derby, as the title suggests, where the player is given the task of racing and destroying cars to score points. The developers implemented simulated physics to make the results of the collisions easier to predict, and they kept the game's tracks small to increase the number of wrecks. Collisions in the game affect the controls of each car, limiting the steering and maximum speed. Frontal collisions risk damage to the car's radiator, which causes the car to overheat and stop running. There are 4 game modes: Destruction Derby, Wreck-'n' Racing, Stock Car Racing, and Time Trial. In this game, you try to earn points by destroying other cars in a large track or in an arena called the Bowl, and in Stock Racing, the player must finish in first place, and no points are awarded for destroying cars. Wreck-'n' Racing is a hybrid of the two, in which you earn points by winning the race and by destroying other cars. Again, this is my first time playing this game, and I find it mildly enjoyable, although I don't enjoy the controls as much. It seems like there's a delay when I start steering, since there's no analog control. It seems like they try to compensate for that by having a delayed response to your steering. Overall, though, I did find this game pretty fun. Oh yeah, now we're getting to the good stuff. This is Final Fantasy VII. And when you start the game, this is the first one that will give you instructions on how to change the disc when prompted in the game. And a quick check of the PlayStation logo screen will show you that this is the American version. And this is the type of game I would expect to see on the PlayStation Classic. Not to go into too much detail, but this game was actually very much anticipated by Final Fantasy fans, as this was the first game where Squaresoft had broken off their partnership with Nintendo due to Nintendo's decision to go with a cartridge-based console, and they wanted to go to a CD-based console because they could make a much bigger game. When first starting up the game, you'll see one of these signature traits that Final Fantasy would become known for, and that is its full-motion video cutscenes. The camera then pulls back straight through without any loading times, and you're given an entirely wide view of this huge metropolis. Combining this scene with the musical accompaniment by Nobuo Uematsu, and it completely sucks you into the game. Almost as soon as the scene begins, the camera pans back in, the music picks up pace, and you are thrown into the middle of the action. So even though this is a game I definitely recommend, even if you've never played an RPG before, this would be one that I would say a lot of people should start with. Just like in early RPGs, the gameplay is mainly dedicated to random encounter battles. In this game, the player can control up to 3 players at once. And later on in the game, you can swap out your characters based on whoever else is in your party. Battles in this game use what's called the active time battle system, in which every player gets a turn every few seconds. Early in the game, players can only attack using their primary weapon. However, throughout the game, weapons can be upgraded, magic can be added, and most characters can learn magic. And although I'd love to go into much more detail about this game, I am going to move on because we have many more games to get to. But needless to say, I do plan on doing a full review of this game sometime in the future. And moving on, next we have Grand Theft Auto. And again, we can see from the PlayStation logo screen that this is another European release. This can also be evidenced by the fact that there is a language select screen at the beginning. We didn't get these in North America. So in this game, the story follows a group of criminals in 3 fictionalized versions of US cities as they perform bank robberies, assassinations, and other illegal activities for their respective crime syndicates. And when the game initially starts, you're pretty much just given freedom to do whatever you want. However, some reviews were critical of the game's graphics. They said that they looked really quite shoddy and dated, and I believe this is especially true today. Reviews were also critical of the game's controls, and that is the game-breaking feature for me. I understand they were limited because they weren't able to use an analog stick, and I'm sure that the top-down perspective was also due to graphical limitations of the PlayStation, but when putting them together, I really didn't care for this at all. And because I feel that the later entries in this series, especially starting with Grand Theft Auto 3, greatly improved upon and fixed most of the problems with the first 2 games, I can't really recommend this game. Next we have IQ, or Intelligent Cube, and this is not only my first time playing this game, but this is my first time actually ever hearing about this game. However, is this game actually fun to play? So I don't like referencing the manual, but luckily this game has an alternative. It actually has a tutorial built in that'll show you how to play the game.
The concept of the game is to try to capture the cubes. The player can mark a spot on the stage by pressing the X button. The marked spot is then deactivated.
Alright, so I'm not going to show you the whole tutorial, but this just gives you a basic idea of what the concept is behind this game. So yeah, I'm doing much better this time, and I actually found this game very addicting. In fact, this is the game I found myself most often coming back to because I just like puzzle games like this. So if you're a fan and you've never played this game before, I'd definitely give this a recommendation and would say this game is very good. Alright, next we're moving on to Jumping Flash. And again, although this game was released in North America, this is the European version. Now, I have seen game footage of this game before, but I have actually never heard of the title. This game is a first-person platform video game co-developed by Exact and Ultra. The game follows a robotic rabbit named Robit as he searches for missing jet pods scattered by the game's astrophysicist antagonist character, Baron Aloha. Robit must explore each section of Crater Planet to receive all of the jet pods, stop Aloha, and save the world from being destroyed. So in this game, you start out in a first-person perspective, and you begin by moving about in a 3-dimensional space. You can rotate the camera in any direction. The top part of the screen shows the remaining time, the player's score, and a character named Kamagoru, which is Robit's sidekick. He often gives warnings and hints to assist in your gameplay. Most of the gameplay is focused on the player's ability to make Robit jump. Robit can jump up to 3 times in midair, which allows him to reach extreme heights. The player has the ability to shoot a low-powered laser beam at a target indicator in the middle of the screen. The player can find and use fireworks for Robit to damage enemies. These include cherry bombs, rockets, Roman candles, and spinners. Now overall, I was initially skeptical of this game actually being any good because of the first-person perspective. However, I quickly found out that the game design is very carefully crafted to compensate for this, and it's actually very easy to control. Overall, I did end up enjoying this game, and I would recommend it to someone to play if they have the PlayStation Classic. And next we're moving on to Metal Gear Solid. For those new to this game, Metal Gear Solid is an action-adventure stealth video game developed by Konami Computer Entertainment Japan and released for PlayStation in 1998. It is regarded by many as one of the greatest and most important video games of all time. Now that said, I am not the biggest fan of this game, as I am not a big fan of stealth action video games. But if you're wanting to try out the genre, this is the one to try out. Out of the ones that I've played, it's definitely the better of the bunch. The only other downside I can say about this game is that even though I praise the fact that they use the in-game engine for all of the cutscenes at the time, this is something that hasn't really aged as well on the PlayStation as much as maybe a full-motion video cutscene would have been.
Snake! What happened? Snake! Snake!
Alright, and going on to another puzzle game, this is Mr. Driller. So once you begin the game and a country is selected, the player then drills in a seemingly endless onslaught of colored blocks, ending with that country's given mileage in meters. The levels are randomly generated, and the blocks can merge with another similarly colored block, therefore disappearing after 4 more blocks merge. The player has an air supply that acts kind of like a life bar. When it's under 30%, the player's complexion will turn blue, and an air bubble with an air capsule will appear on top of his head. Again, this is another game where it's my first time playing it, so I'm not quite sure what kind of status this has in terms of iconic PlayStation titles, but nevertheless is enjoyable, and I would definitely recommend giving this game a try. Next we have Oddworld: Abe's Odyssey. This is a platform video game developed by Oddworld inhabitants and published by GT Interactive. Upon release, this game was widely acclaimed for having innovative gameplay, good art direction, and engaging cutscenes. However, its steep learning curve and system of only saving at checkpoints sometimes received criticism. The only thing I have to say about this game is Oddworld is right. I don't think I've ever seen a game quite like this, and it is very unique. I do agree with the steep learning curve of this game, and as a result, I haven't really played through it much. Though I do plan to go back to it sometime, this is not really a game I would recommend for everyone. Alright, next we're going to take a look at Rayman. Rayman is a side-scrolling video game developed and published by Ubisoft. It is the first installment in the Rayman series. The game follows the adventures of Rayman, a hero who must save his colorful world from the evil Dr. Mark. The player starts out as Rayman, and they must travel through 6 worlds. The goal of each level is to free all of the caged Electoons, 6 cages of whom are located somewhere on each level. Only when all the Electoons are freed will Rayman be able to reach and confront Dr. Mark in his lair in Candy Chateau. Each level is divided into several maps. Each level is completed when Rayman reaches the exclamation point sign at the end of each level. When starting out the game, you don't really have much in terms of attack, however early on you do earn Rayman's telescopic fist. This allows him to punch enemies from a distance. I have played Rayman games before, although this is my first time playing it on the original PlayStation. I do enjoy this game as I do enjoy a lot of side-scrolling platformers, and this game is actually refreshing because the platformers I remember from this era were all in 3D and they were trying to take platforming into the next dimension. I would say this is a worthy addition to the PlayStation Classic, however there are other platformers that were not included I would say should have been before this one. But it doesn't make this selection bad either, so that's my perspective on it. Well now, here's a game that I think a lot of people would recognize for the PlayStation, and that is Resident Evil. The gameplay consists largely of third-person action with added emphasis on inventory management, exploration, and puzzle solving. This game establishes the formula that has lived throughout the entire series, including the control scheme, inventory system, save system, and use of 3D models superimposed over pre-rendered backgrounds. I was not a fan of the original Resident Evil, however I did find this game much more enjoyable. I do think this is a game that should have been included on the PlayStation Classic, and I'm glad it was. I've never really been a fan of the horror survival genre, so I'm trying not to be too biased, but I will say if you are a fan, I think this game is probably the grandfather of most of them. So this would give you a good introduction to the earliest horror survival games. So until I actually started reviewing this game, I didn't realize I was actually calling it by the wrong name all the time. It's actually Revelations Persona instead of just Persona. Gameplay revolves around the character navigating around environments of their town, and fighting enemies using their personas. During the course of the game, the player can create new personas for battle using spell cards gained in battle or by talking with enemies. My personal take on this game is that if you are a fan of Japanese RPGs that are not set in the fantasy stereotypes such as Final Fantasy, this is a game that you will most likely enjoy. However, because most of us in the United States are not a fan of JRPGs, this game is kind of like an odd duckling on this console, in the fact that it's stuck between somewhere of cult classic and obscure game that people don't know much about. Overall, though, it is in my opinion that this game is not going to be enjoyed by the mass majority of people who would purchase this console, and therefore, because there are more accessible RPGs on here that they did include, such as Final Fantasy VII, I'm not quite sure why this game was also included. But again, that's just from my perspective of not really having heard of this game too much and never playing it until just now. And next we're moving on to Ridge Racer Type 4. This is a standard arcade racing video game with an emphasis on power sliding around corners. Vehicles use one of 2 styles of power sliding depending on the make of the car they select, which could be drift or grip. Drift cars require players to tap the brake once while turning to brake into a smooth power slide, while grip cars require players to alternate between brakes and gas while turning to power slide. There are a total of 320 vehicles that can be earned, with every combination of team, manufacturer, and qualifying position, and if the players unlock all 320, they will unlock one additional car modeled after Pac-Man for a total of 321 vehicles. I personally did enjoy this game, but I never did own any Ridge Racer game for the original PlayStation when it was first released. Mainly because I was caught up playing Gran Turismo, which I think is the more iconic title and featured racing modes other than arcade, but this one would be a close runner-up. Now here's an interesting title, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo. In this game, the player controls pairs of blocks or gems that drop into a pit-like playfield. Gems can be eliminated by coming into contact with a crash gem of the same color. That also eliminates all adjacent gems of that same color. The game keeps going until one player's field reaches the top of its fourth column, which is where all the new gems appear. If you have played Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, this game is very similar. If you are a fan of these types of puzzle games, this is a game that I think you're going to enjoy. Even though I don't really find myself playing those games too often, I did find this game really fun, especially when played with two players. So again, while I did enjoy this title, I don't think it has the broad spread appeal that titles on this system should have. Syphon Filter is a third-person shooter stealth video game developed by
989 Studios.
This game is presented in a third-person perspective, and the player can move freely in the three-dimensional space and rotate the camera in any direction. The core of the gameplay is focused on stealth-based tactics, which require one to silently take out enemies using silenced weapons or other lethal attacks. Even though I was aware of this series, I actually did not own any of these for the original PlayStation 1 for the same reason I didn't like a lot of shooters. Before Halo and the control scheme where dual analog sticks would be used, I actually didn't find a lot of these shooters on consoles to be very fun, and that was only due to the control scheme that I just didn't particularly care for. So as a result, I don't find these games as nostalgic as some others. Tekken 3 is a fighting video game. This game features a largely new cast of characters, including the debut of several now staple characters in this series. Tekken 3 maintains the same core fighting system and concept of its predecessors. However, this game did add an emphasis on the third axis, allowing characters to sidestep in or out of the background. Fighters now jump at more reasonable heights, as opposed to previous games, making them less overwhelming and putting more use to sidestep dodges, as jumping can no longer dodge every ground attack. Overall, if you're a fan of these early 3D fighting games, I don't think you can get much better than this game, and this game was definitely deserved to be on the PlayStation Classic. Alright, we're running out of games here. This is Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. This is a tactical shooter video game, and the first in the Rainbow Six series. Again, this game focuses more on stealth and tactics rather than on sheer firepower, exploring the lethality of a single bullet. When released, Rainbow Six was met with mostly positive reviews on PC, however the console versions received an average to negative reviews upon release. And out of all the consoles it was ported to, the PlayStation version was generally rated at the bottom, and so this actually makes me question more why it was included on this console. To tell you the truth, I actually didn't get in this game very much. I would assume I would need some sort of strategy guide in order to know how to successfully complete these missions better, especially since some areas are particularly hard and incredibly frustrating. Now here's a game I associate with the first PlayStation, that is Twisted Metal. This game is part of a series of vehicular combat games that were published by Sony Computer Entertainment and developed by various companies. In this game, the player takes control of a vehicle that they can accelerate, steer, brake, and reverse, and activate turbo, as well as use weapons using the controller's D-pad and buttons. The player can choose a one-player mode in which the game's story takes place, or a dual mode in which two human players can select the battleground in which to compete in. In single-player mode, the player must progress through 6 combat arenas of progressively increasing size, and featuring progressively more difficult opponents. I have to say I do enjoy this game very much, and I remember playing this on the PlayStation despite never having owned it. Again, I do feel this game is best played with 2 players, and should provide a couple of hours of entertainment. My only criticism of this game is that they could have included maybe Twisted Metal 2, which was the most successful of the series, nevertheless still an iconic game to include on the PlayStation Classic. And well, here we are, the final game on the PlayStation Classic, Wild Arms. It is noteworthy for being the first role-playing video game on the Sony PlayStation, as well as one of the few to feature a Western American setting and motif. The player starts out in control of a young boy named Rudy, who has the ability to operate powerful weapons called Ancient Relic Machines, or ARMS. The game is mainly presented in a top-down two-dimensional perspective, where the player has an overhead view of the action taking place on any particular screen. To advance, the player must overcome a number of story-based scenarios and sequences that involve navigating through dungeons while fighting enemies that appear randomly. Battle scenes are presented entirely in 3D. Wild Arms uses a turn-based battle system in which the player inputs commands at the start of each round, designating which actions take place. Each of the 3 playable characters has a unique set of abilities that can be used to defeat enemies or aid party members. Each character also has a force bar divided into 4 equal-sized sections called levels. As the bar's level increases, the player is given access to one of 4 force techniques made available through different areas of gameplay. This game received a hugely positive response in Japan during its first few weeks after release. However, this game did have a big marketing problem. It was also released the same year as Final Fantasy VII. That said, I did find this game a little bit enjoyable, but I found it more enjoyable because it reminded me of the last RPGs released on the Super Nintendo. While the Final Fantasy series was moving into a more modern/futuristic setting, this game reminds me of the older RPGs that were set in the past or in a fantasy setting. I can only state that my initial response to this game is a positive one, and that I will find myself going back and playing this game further. So that said, I would say that I would recommend this game for those of you who haven't played this game before, especially if you're a fan of those older RPGs that came out in the Super Nintendo era.
Alright, so that finishes up all of the games on the PlayStation Classic. In my next video, I'm going to go ahead and go back through and show you what I think of the PlayStation Classic, and finally tell you if I think it is worth it. So stay tuned for that video, and again, if it's already posted, I'll leave a link to it at the end of this video. That said, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you'd like to see some of the content I've already done, feel free to click on some of the suggestions that are popping up on your screen. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.